Welcome to Food on the Mind, Awaken Genius, where we break free from food obsession, unlock our potential, and build a life worth living. I'm Jeb Stuart Johnston, and here we dig into the psychology, philosophy, and strategy behind lasting change. Because transformation isn't just about what's on your plate, it's about what's on your mind. If you're here, I appreciate you. If you find this episode valuable, hit subscribe, leave a review, and if you're watching on YouTube, drop a like and a comment. It helps more than you know. Now, let's dive in. So today we're examining Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. On the surface, it's a roadmap for meaning and transformation, a myth that promises our struggles matter, that our pain has purpose. But underneath, it can quietly feed something darker: narcissism, self-righteousness, and the kind of division that tears communities apart. So here's the question haunting this conversation. Does this ancient pattern actually help us live better lives? Or does it sometimes make us more dangerous to ourselves and each other? Before we start poking holes in Campbell's masterpiece, let's understand why this pattern has such a grip on our collective imagination. Because even if you've never read The Hero with a Thousand Faces, this myth has been shaping your world since childhood. So Joseph Campbell was a comparative mythologist with an audacious thesis that beneath the surface, differences of human culture, Greek gods, Buddhist seekers, Norse warriors, we've been telling the same story for thousands of years. He called it the monomyth, but we know it as the hero's journey. Here's the skeleton that holds up every story you've ever loved. First, the call to adventure. The hero begins in ordinary life, predictable and safe, and then something disrupts the familiar. A crisis, an invitation, an event that demands you step beyond the known world. Luke Skywalker leaves his desert farm. Frodo abandons the Shire. A kid gets a letter to Hogwarts. The comfortable world cracks open, revealing possibility and terror in equal measure. Next, we have crossing the threshold. This is the point of no return. The moment the hero steps from the familiar world into the strange one. It's terrifying and electric, disorienting, yet full of possibility. Once you cross, there's no going back to who you were before. Then we have trials and tests. The path forward becomes a crucible of obstacles, monsters, enemies, temptations, the voice in your head whispering you're not enough. But helpers appear here too, right? We have Yoda, Gandalf, Dumbledore, Mr. Miyagi. The mentor archetype guides you through the darkness, offering wisdom when you need it most. Then we come to the ordeal. At the heart of every journey comes the confrontation with death, literal or symbolic. The dragon, the abyss, the underworld, the near-death moment that strips the hero down to nothing, demanding everything they have and more. And then the transformation. If they survive, they emerge reborn. Not the same person who began the journey, but someone carrying new wisdom, new power, new understanding. They've gained an elixir, a boon, some treasure they didn't possess before. The return. Finally, the hero comes home, but transformed, carrying something precious back to the ordinary world. And here's the crucial part. The treasure isn't just for them. It's meant to heal, uplift, or transform the community. That's the full cycle: leaving, transformation, returning with the gift. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. It's the DNA of Star Wars, the architecture of the Matrix, the engine driving Marvel's empire. It's Frodo and Sam carrying the ring through Middle-earth. It's Moana sailing across the ocean to save her people. Even most video games run on this same fuel. You leave the familiar, struggle through challenges, grow stronger, and return victorious. But here's what makes it stick deeper than entertainment. It doesn't just tell us stories. It explains us. So when I first stumbled upon Campbell's work, obviously like 30 years ago, it probably didn't do much, but years later, it hit me like lightning splitting a tree. For years, my life had looked like nothing but chaos and destruction. Addiction, relapse, the wreckage of decisions that made no sense even to me. On paper, it was wasted time, pure destruction. But suddenly, I could reframe everything. Addiction became my underworld. Relapse was my dragon. Rehab was my series of trials. Getting clean was my ordeal. That near-death confrontation with everything I'd avoided. Of course, there was quite a few actual near-death confrontations as well. But eventually, recovery became the treasure I could offer others still trapped in the darkness. For someone who'd felt like his life was meaningless noise, suddenly it had symphony. And I've watched this transformation happen with clients too. Someone drowning in emotional eating or struggling with their health or burning out from endless pressure, they don't just see themselves as failing anymore. When they learn about this model, they can reframe their experience. I'm not just broken. I'm in the ordeal. This is my test. If I keep walking, transformation is possible. That shift alone can resurrect hope from despair. This is why Campbell's framework has conquered not just Hollywood, but psychology, coaching, recovery work, even advertising. It promises that our chaos can be recast as destiny. Our suffering can be reframed as sacred. It tells us your pain has a place. Your struggles are part of the story. You're not lost. You're on a path. And that's medicine most of us desperately need. But here's where the story gets dangerous. That same promise, you are the hero, that your struggles are mythically significant, becomes toxic when we believe it too literally. When we forget it's an archetype and start treating it as identity. The hero's journey works because it offers something most of us desperately crave: a map through the chaos. Life often feels fragmented, random, and cruel. We wake up, trudge through responsibilities, stumble through hardships, and wonder if any of it means anything. Days blur into weeks, weeks into years, and we're left asking, is this it? Is this all there is? Then Campbell arrives with his gift. Your life isn't random, it's mythic. Your pain isn't pointless, it's purposeful. You're not drifting, you're on a quest. That's intoxicating for souls starved of meaning. Think about how this shows up everywhere now. Self-help gurus package transformation as a hero's journey. Answer your call, face your fears, emerge victorious. Fitness influencers frame weight loss as slaying dragons and conquering kingdoms. Business coaches promise to help you become the hero of your entrepreneurial saga. Even brands hijack the pattern. Buy this product and answer your call to adventure. We eat it up because when life feels like chaos, the hero's journey offers coherence. It whispers seductive truths. You matter. Your struggles are meaningful. You're chosen for something important. Your story is worth telling. And that's where the hook gets set. Because if I can see my life as part of a grand narrative, then my suffering isn't pointless. It has a place. The struggle I'm in right now, that's not just bad luck or random misfortune. It's the ordeal. The moment before transformation. The dragon that stands between me and the treasure I'm meant to find. That reframe is magnetic. That's why Hollywood keeps mining Campbell's work. George Lucas famously built Star Wars on the hero's journey template. The Matrix trilogy follows it beat by beat. Harry Potter leaving his cupboard under the stairs for the magical world? Same blueprint. And Marvel has built $1 billion empire on endless variations of this single theme. The formula works because it hits something primal in us. We want to believe our struggles are part of something bigger than us grinding through the mess of ordinary existence. But here's where the medicine becomes poison. If I'm the hero of this story, then everyone else automatically gets reduced to supporting characters in my movie. And that's when empathy starts to die. We live in a culture that amplifies this delusion perfectly. Byung-Chul Han in The Burnout Society talks about how modern people have become achievement subjects, constantly performing, curating, branding ourselves, starring in our own production. Social media has only intensified this phenomenon. We don't just live our lives anymore. We document them, filter them, craft them into narrative arcs for public consumption. We even have phrases like main character energy that celebrate this protagonist thinking. That's the hero's journey distorted into personal branding. Instagram stories become mini documentaries of our heroic journeys. LinkedIn posts frame career setbacks as dragons we've slain. Dating apps become platforms for showcasing our transformed selves, the treasure we've brought back from our personal underworlds. And while there's something empowering about owning your story, there's also something dangerous about believing it too deeply in your own mythology. The first shadow cast by the hero's journey is what I call the Protagonist Delusion, the unconscious assumption that you are the central character in the story of life. When I cast myself as the protagonist of a mythic narrative, something fundamental shifts in how I see the world. See, you stop being a complete human being with your own complex inner life, your own struggles and dreams and contradictions. Instead, you became my mentor, my sidekick, my comic relief, or worse, the obstacle I need to overcome, the dragon I need to slay. Your meaning gets defined entirely by your relationship to my quest. This sounds harmless in theory, but watch how it murders empathy in practice. People aren't characters in your drama. They're living their own complete, messy, beautiful stories. But when you're absorbed in protagonist thinking, you lose the ability to imagine the richness of anyone else's narrative. I've seen this play out in recovery communities in heartbreaking ways. Someone discovers they can reframe their addiction through the hero's journey. Addiction becomes the underworld. Recovery becomes the return with the boon. The framing can be incredibly powerful, giving meaning to years of pain and chaos. But sometimes, people get stuck in the identity of hero. Suddenly, family members aren't seen as complex humans working through their own trauma for living with an addict. They become the grateful audience for the comeback story. Sponsors aren't fellow travelers offering hard-won wisdom. They're wise mentors whose value is measured by how they serve the protagonist's arc. Even other addicts in recovery get flattened into either inspiring allies or cautionary tales. This protagonist delusion promises centrality and meaning. Cost is the death of genuine empathy, the ability to truly see and honor the full humanity of others. Here's the second, darker truth that haunts this conversation. Every villain in history has also seen themselves as the protagonist of their own heroic story. This isn't Hollywood cliche. It's fundamental human psychology. Very few people wake up in the morning and consciously choose evil. Instead, they frame their actions as righteous, necessary, even noble. They cast themselves as the heroes fighting against chaos, ignorance, or oppression. History overflows with examples that should terrify us. Dictators justify genocides as protecting their people. Terrorists frame mass violence as liberation struggles. Cult leaders convince themselves they're offering salvation to lost souls. Corporate executives destroying the environment tell themselves they're creating jobs and progress. Even on smaller scales, the coworker who systematically undermines you, the family member who launches vicious attacks, the neighbor who makes everyone's life miserable, they usually believe they're standing up for what's right or refusing to be pushed around. From the inside of their experience, they're not villains. They're heroes fighting necessary battles against forces of darkness. This is where the hero's journey becomes a profoundly dangerous lens. Because if I cast myself as the hero, then by definition, whatever I do must be heroic. If I'm on a righteous quest to slay the dragon, then any destruction I cause along the way gets justified as necessary collateral. Hannah Arendt captured this dynamic with her chilling phrase, the banality of evil. She was writing about Nazi bureaucrats who oversaw unspeakable atrocities, not with villainous glee or obvious malice, but with the quiet conviction that they were doing their duty, serving history, fulfilling their role in a larger story. That's the terrifying part. Ordinary people doing monstrous things under the sincere belief that they are serving a higher purpose, playing the hero in a cosmic drama. The hero's journey, in its shadow form, provides the perfect psychological script for this delusion. I've been called to something important. I face great trials and powerful enemies. Whatever I do in service of my sacred quest is justified by the righteousness of my cause. And I've lived this distortion personally. During my years of active addiction, I told myself elaborate stories about my heroic struggle for freedom. I was refusing to be controlled by society's expectations. I was living authentically, on my own terms, following my truth regardless of consequences. I was the rebel, the free spirit, the one brave enough to reject conventional limitations. In reality, I was self-destructing and devastating everyone who cared about me. But because I was the protagonist in my internal narrative, I could justify almost everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every act of selfishness got reframed as part of my heroic refusal to surrender my authentic self. The myth of the hero doesn't protect us from self-righteousness and destruction. In the wrong hands, it becomes the perfect camouflage for both. The third shadow is how the hero's journey thrives on binary thinking, and how that binary thinking is fracturing our world. Every compelling story needs tension, conflict, drama. Campbell's arc delivers this through clear contrasts: good versus evil, order versus chaos, light versus dark, the known versus the unknown. The hero must venture from safety into danger, confront darkness, and bring back light. That's what makes the stories work. But real life is far messier than mythic binaries suggest. Carl Jung spent his career warning that splitting the psyche into simple good and evil parts leads inevitably to psychological projection. Whatever I can't face in myself, my selfishness, my cruelty, my ignorance, my fear, I unconsciously cast onto others. If I'm the hero in my story, then someone else has to be the villain. If I represent order and righteousness, then you must embody chaos and evil. If I stand for truth, you must represent lies. This logic is driving the polarization, tearing our culture apart. Politics becomes mythic combat where my side is defending civilization itself while your side is trying to destroy everything good and decent. Religion splits into our divine truth versus their demonic deception. Even wellness culture fractures into warring camps. Keto versus vegan, natural versus pharmaceutical, discipline versus self-compassion, the enlightened versus the ignorant. Social media amplifies this binary thinking perfectly. Scroll through any platform and you'll see posts that boil incredibly complex realities down to two opposing sides: the authentic versus the fake, the awake versus the sleep, the good people versus the bad people, us versus them. And here's the insidious part. Once I see myself as the hero of my story, nuance becomes not just unnecessary, but dangerous. I don't need to wrestle with the complexity of your perspective or question my own motives and blind spots. I just need to defeat you. The hero's journey was supposed to reveal universal human patterns that unite us across cultural differences. Instead, in our hands, it's fracturing us into a million competing narratives, each person starring in their own heroic saga, everyone convinced that they represent the light fighting against someone else's darkness. So I mentioned recoveries. Let me get specific about how this plays out, since that's where I first encountered both the power and danger of heroic thinking. The hero's journey can be genuinely transformative for people in early recovery. After years of feeling like your life is meaningless chaos, lying, stealing, hurting people, destroying everything you touch, suddenly you can reframe the whole experience. Addiction becomes your descent into the underworld. The consequences become trials that teach you hard lessons. Hitting bottom becomes the ordeal that strips you bare. And recovery becomes the treasure you bring back to help others still trapped in the darkness. That reframe can literally save lives. I've seen it happen. People who are drowning in shame and self-hatred suddenly have a way to make meaning from their pain. But I've also watched the same framework become toxic when people get addicted to being the hero of their recovery story. Suddenly, family members who lived through hell become grateful audiences for that comeback narrative. Their own trauma from dealing with an active addict gets minimized or ignored. They're just supporting characters in the hero's redemption arc. As we mentioned, sponsors and counselors, they get reduced to wise mentors whose value is measured by how well they serve that protagonist's journey. Other people in recovery become inspiring allies, proving that transformation is possible, or cautionary tales, proving how special and successful the hero's own journey has been. And here's where it gets really dangerous. When someone identifies too strongly with being the hero of their recovery story, relapse becomes not just a setback, but a complete identity crisis. Because heroes don't fail. Heroes don't fall back into the underworld once they've returned with the treasure. I've seen people in long-term recovery become insufferably self-righteous, convinced that their journey has made them wiser and more enlightened than people who haven't walked their particular path. They develop what's sometimes called terminal uniqueness, the belief that their experience is so special, so profound, so heroic that normal rules don't apply to them. It's not recovery. That's spiritual materialism wearing a recovery costume. But before we burn Campbell's entire life work at the stake, let's pause and consider whether the problem lies with this framework itself or with how our culture has systematically distorted and misapplied it. The first and most crucial point: Campbell never intended the hero to be taken as personal identity. The hero isn't you, and it's not me either. It's an archetype, a universal pattern living in what Jung called the collective unconscious. When Campbell describes slaying dragons or journeying through underworlds, he's not encouraging ego inflation or personal grandiosity. He's pointing to inner psychological realities that every human being faces: confronting fear, integrating shadow material, transcending limiting identities, facing the reality of death and impermanence. The dragon in mythic thinking isn't usually an external enemy. It's the psychological material we are avoiding. The underworld isn't a place out there. It's the descent into unconscious parts of the psyche that we've been afraid to face. The death and resurrection isn't literal. It's the symbolic death of old ways of being that no longer serve us. And again, Carl Jung, who deeply influenced Campbell's thinking, explicitly warned against identifying too strong with archetypes. He called this inflation, when the ego makes itself for something larger than it actually is, like confusing yourself with the self or the hero or even God. Jung considered inflation one of the most dangerous psychological states, leading to disordered perception, grandiose behavior, and often spectacular collapse. If you crown yourself the hero and start living from that identity, you've already missed the entire point of what Campbell was trying to communicate. The hero archetype isn't about being special or central. It's about recognizing that you're human. And humans across all cultures and throughout all of history share certain universal patterns of psychological development. Being called to grow beyond familiar limitation, facing trials that test and strengthen us, confronting our deepest fears and limitations, and hopefully emerging with greater wisdom and compassion. When I approach my own story this way, not as Jeb the hero, but as one particular human being living out universal archetypal patterns, it becomes profoundly grounding rather than inflating. I'm not alone in my struggles. My specific pain connects me to the vast community of humans who face similar dragons throughout history. And that's humility, not narcissism. The second point in Campbell's defense: his framework already accounts for the reality that villains see themselves as heroes. The hero's journey includes failure modes. What happens when the journey goes wrong? If you read Campbell carefully, the mythic cycle isn't a guarantee of success or a recipe for guaranteed transformation. It includes multiple points where the hero can fail, get stuck, or become corrupted by the very journey that was meant to redeem them. There's the refusal of the call, the hero who never begins the journey at all. There's the hero who gets lost in the underworld and never returns. There's the hero who's seduced by power during the trials. And perhaps, most relevantly, there's the hero who becomes a tyrant, who completes the journey but gets corrupted by their own success. Think about mythic stories. Skywalker begins as the chosen one, the ultimate hero, and becomes Darth Vader. Gollum in Lord of the Rings was once a creature not unlike a hobbit, but got consumed by his obsession with the ring. Countless trickster figures in world mythologies start with noble intentions, but collapse under their own shadow and become forces of chaos. These aren't side notes or exceptions to the pattern. They're essential to it. The villain is not a completely different archetype from the hero. The villain is often the failed hero, the one who couldn't integrate their shadow, who got stuck in one phase of the journey, who lost humility along the way. Campbell would say, the person who uses heroic mythology to justify destructive behavior isn't following the hero's journey. They're demonstrating what happens when you misunderstand it or get trapped in one of its shadow forms. The hero's journey doesn't ignore the risk of self-righteousness and grandiosity. It dramatizes that risk. The temptation to confuse your personal quest with cosmic destiny, to justify destruction as necessary for the greater good, to lose humility and become drunk on your own power, that's not outside the mythology. That is the central trial at the heart of every heroic story. Most heroes fail. Most people who begin a journey of transformation get seduced by power or stuck in victim identity or lost in the complexity of their own psychology. The stories that survive and get retold across generations are often warnings about these failure modes as much as they are inspiration towards growth. Campbell was crystal clear about this. The heroic cycle is incomplete if the hero doesn't come back with the boon, the treasure, the medicine that can heal or benefit others. The whole point of the ordeal and transformation is to gain something that serves the larger community. That completely flips the narcissism critique on its head. The true hero's journey isn't about individual glory, it's about what the individual can contribute after being transformed by their trials. The hero doesn't get crowned king and rule forever. In most authentic mythic traditions, the hero returns to the ordinary world, often anonymously, and their worth is measured entirely by what they give back. They become teachers, healers, guides for others who are still struggling with the same dragons they've learned to face. Think about mythic patterns. Prometheus doesn't steal fire for his own benefit. He brings it to humanity. Gilgamesh returns from his journey with hard-won wisdom about morality that serves his people. Frodo comes back to the Shire forever changed, carrying the psychological shadow of the ring so others don't have to bear that burden. In recovery communities, this plays out beautifully when it's working correctly. People who have found genuine recovery don't hoard their transformation. They become sponsors. They share their experience in meetings. They extend their hands to newcomers who are where they used to be. The true test of whether someone has completed their hero's journey isn't whether they feel heroic. It's whether they're able to serve others who are still struggling. If someone stops at, look how heroic and transformed I am, they've actually failed the journey. They've gotten stuck in self-congratulation instead of moving into the service that makes the whole cycle meaningful. Campbell's entire scholarly project was aimed at revealing universality beneath surface differences, not creating more division. The reason he called his discovery the monomyth was because he wanted to demonstrate that underneath all the cultural variations, Greek, Hindu, Native American, Christian, Buddhist, African, European, the same essential structure appears again and again. That's not a recipe for tribalism. That's a map of shared human experience. The hero's journey, properly understood, says we are all in this together, regardless of our surface differences. We all face dragons. We all have opportunities to descend into our personal underworlds. We all have the potential to return with gifts that serve the larger human community. If modern culture has twisted this into fuel for narcissism, competition, and us versus them thinking, that represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what Campbell was pointing towards. His intent was to give us a common vocabulary for meaning-making that transcends cultural boundaries and helps us recognize our shared humanity. The hero archetype is meant to be universal and humble, not personal and grandiose. The framework, it already contains warnings about fallen heroes and corrupted quests. The true battle is always internal, demanding ego death rather than ego inflation. The journey's completion is measured by service to others, not personal glory. And the entire project aims toward recognizing our shared humanity. Campbell consistently emphasized that the real hero's journey isn't about external conquest. It's about internal transformation. The dragon you need to slay isn't usually some external enemy. It's the fear you've been avoiding, the addiction you've been denying, the false sense of control you've been clinging to, the immature aspects of your personality that keep sabotaging your growth. The ordeal at the heart of the journey is the confrontation with your own psychological limitations, the symbolic death of outdated ways of being that no longer serve your development. That's why in authentic mythic traditions, the hero often has to die, sometimes literally, but more often symbolically. In shamanic initiation rites, the candidate descends into visionary underworlds where they're torn apart by spirits and reassembled in new form. In Christian mythology, Christ must die before resurrection becomes possible. In Buddhist psychology, the ego must dissolve before enlightenment can dawn. These aren't stories of ego inflation. They're stories of ego death, ego transcendence, ego integration into something larger and more mature. When I look back honestly at my own recovery process, I can see this clearly. My real dragon was never external circumstances, other people, or societal pressures. My dragon was internal. The illusion that I could manage my life through willpower and control alone. The unconscious belief that I was the center of the universe. The resistance to surrendering my grandiose fantasies about myself. Facing that dragon meant ego death. It meant admitting that my way of living wasn't working. It meant surrendering the story that I was special, that normal rules didn't apply to me, that I could figure everything out myself. That wasn't narcissistic self-aggrandizement. It was the crucifixion of narcissism. It was learning that I'm not the center of the story, that my will isn't supreme, that I need help from sources beyond my own limited understanding. If someone is using the hero's journey to puff themselves up or justify harmful behavior, they're fundamentally misunderstanding what the journey is actually about. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the hero's journey doesn't end with the transformation of the individual hero. It ends with a return to the community, and that return is fundamentally about service, not personal glorification. Far from encouraging narcissism, the hero's journey, when rightly understood and applied, may be one of the most powerful antidotes to narcissism available to us. The problem isn't with Campbell's insights. The problem is with how they get distorted when they collide with cultural obsession with individual performance, personal branding, and competitive achievement. So where does this leave us? Campbell's framework contains genuine wisdom that has helped millions of people find meaning in their struggles, but it also carries real danger when misapplied in our cultural context. The path forward is not to throw out the hero's journey entirely. It's to evolve how we understand and apply it. First, we need to acknowledge that we live in a very different context from the oral traditions where these mythic patterns originally developed. We exist in an individualistic, capitalist culture where the self is constantly being packaged, marketed, and performed. You don't just live, you brand yourself. You don't just exist, you curate your existence for social media consumption. You don't just have experiences, you craft those experiences into content that builds your personal platform. In that environment, Campbell's archetypal insights inevitably get distorted. Instead of being symbolic patterns that connect us to universal human experience, they become slogans for self-promotion. Be the hero of your story. That sounds inspiring on an Instagram post, but listen closely and you'll hear how the meaning has been inverted. It makes you the center of everything. It promises that meaning comes from triumph and achievement, not from presence and service. It frames life as an endless series of battles to conquer, so you can show everyone your trophies. This isn't mythology anymore. It's marketing. The hero's journey gets hijacked to sell everything from sneakers to self-help programs to political candidates. In the process, something essential gets lost. What was designed to connect us to something larger than ourselves shrinks down to fuel individual ego projects. My transformation, my story, my brand, my platform. If we want the hero's journey to serve psychological and spiritual health in our time, we need to consciously reframe it. Here are 3 essential shifts. First, from hero to pilgrim. Instead of casting yourself as the central hero of an epic story, what if you thought of yourself as a pilgrim on a sacred journey? Pilgrimage is entirely different spiritual architecture. It's not about conquest, achievement, or proving yourself. It's about humility, openness, and allowing yourself to be transformed by the path itself. The pilgrim doesn't slay dragons to demonstrate their power. They walk the road to have their hearts broken open. They don't endure hardship to show how strong they are. They embrace difficulty as a teacher that strips away illusions and connects them more deeply to life. Religious and wisdom traditions around the world are rich in pilgrimage practices. The Camino de Santiago in Spain, the Hajj to Mecca, vision quests in Native American traditions, walking meditation practices in Buddhism. The common thread is that these journeys are designed not to inflate the ego, but to dissolve it, to strip you down so that you return with a fundamentally new relationship to existence itself. Imagine reframing personal growth, health journeys, or recovery processes this way. Instead of become the hero of your story, the invitation becomes walk the path as a humble pilgrim. This means less obsession with outcomes, achievements, and before and after photos. More openness to being genuinely changed by whatever the journey brings. A pilgrim doesn't need to conquer anything. A pilgrim just needs to keep walking with an open heart. Next, we could go from villain projection to shadow integration. This is a second crucial reframe. Stop projecting villains onto external people and start recognizing the villain that lives within your own psyche. Carl Jung argued that the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge, is always present in every human being. If we don't consciously face and integrate our shadow material, we unconsciously project it onto others, making them into enemies so we don't have to confront the darkness within ourselves. The hero's journey, reframed through Jungian shadow work, teaches us that the dragon isn't out there, it's in here. The villain isn't the other political party, the other tribe, the person who disagrees with your worldview. The villain is whatever parts of yourself you haven't been willing to face. Your capacity for selfishness, cruelty, self-deception, fear. In coaching and therapeutic work, this reframe is transformational. A client who insists, I just have no willpower, I'm weak, I'm broken, is usually shadowboxing, fighting with projected aspects of themselves rather than doing the real work of integration. Their actual dragon might be shame, perfectionism, the unconscious belief that they need to be perfect to be worthy of love. Once they recognize that the battle is internal rather than external, everything changes. They're no longer trying to destroy an enemy. They're trying to understand and integrate disowned parts of themselves. Instead of hero versus villain, the framework becomes self versus shadow. Integration rather than conquest. Compassion rather than warfare. And then we get to this personal arc into communal healing, right? The final essential reframe is to move from individual triumph towards communal contribution. In Campbell's original vision, the return with the boon was always for the benefit of the larger community. But in our self-obsessed culture, that crucial element often gets completely dropped. The hero posts their transformation photos, collects applause and admiration, and the story ends there. But authentic heroism has never been measured by the quality of your personal trophy collection. It's measured by what you bring back that serves others. Think about recovery communities when they're functioning at their best. The boon isn't just that you personally got sober. It's that you now have something to offer people who are still suffering. Your transformation becomes medicine that can help heal others. The same principle applies to any area of growth. If you heal your relationship with food, that healing doesn't just serve you. It ripples out to your family, friends, children who learn healthier patterns from your example. If you learn to regulate your nervous system, that skill doesn't just calm your own anxiety. It creates safety for everyone who interacts with you. Reframing the hero's journey means constantly asking, who benefits from my growth besides me? Because if the honest answer is no one, then maybe the journey isn't complete yet. If we accept these reframes, then the real test of heroism in our era isn't about slaying dragons or achieving personal glory. It's about transcending the need to be central, important, or special at all. That's a hard sell in a culture addicted to individual achievement and social media validation. But it might be the most important psychological shift we can make. Maybe heroism today looks less like a wielding a sword and more like practicing deep presence. Less like declaring victory and more like listening with genuine curiosity. Less like claiming the spotlight and more like creating space for others to be seen and heard. I think about this in my own life constantly. When I was actively addicted, I told myself I was living heroically, fast, rebellious, refusing to be controlled by society's expectations. In reality, I was lost. I was scared. I was destroying everything I touched. Recovery didn't make me the hero of my story. It taught me that I wasn't the center of the universe. It humbled me in the most profound way possible. And paradoxically, that humility is what gave me something genuinely worth offering to others. In my coaching practice, I see this pattern repeatedly. Clients who approach their growth from a heroic mindset, trying to conquer their bodies, defeat their cravings, win the battle against their limitations, well, they often burn out or get trapped in cycles of perfectionism, self-criticism. But the clients who embrace what I call Pilgrim consciousness, who approach their relationship with food, their bodies, their emotions with humility and curiosity rather than a need to conquer, those are the ones who actually transform. And their transformation naturally radiates outward, blessing everyone around them. Maybe the real test of heroism in our time is whether you can release the need to be seen as heroic at all. So, what does this look like practically? How do we live the hero's journey in a way that serves growth rather than feeding ego? Well, to start, let's practice Pilgrim consciousness. Approach your challenges, whether they're health-related, relational, professional, or spiritual, with the heart of a pilgrim rather than a warrior. Ask yourself, how is this difficulty trying to teach me? What am I being invited to release? How can I let this experience change me rather than trying to change it? Next, do shadow work instead of villain hunting. When you notice yourself making someone else the bad guy in your story, pause and ask, what aspect of myself might this person be reflecting? What am I refusing to face in my own psychology? How might this conflict be inviting me towards greater self-awareness? Next, connect your growth to service. Regularly reflect on how your personal development serves others. If you're working on emotional regulation, notice how that creates more safety in your relationships. If you're healing your relationship with food, observe how that affects your family dynamics. Let your growth be motivated by contribution, not just personal improvement. Next, embrace ordinariness. Resist the cultural pressure to make your journey special, unique, or extraordinary. You're a human being doing the ordinary human work of growing up. That's sacred enough without needing to be mythic. Next, practice beginner's mind. No matter how much you've grown or learned, maintain the humility of someone who's still learning. That white belt mentality. The moment you start believing you've arrived or completed your journey is usually the moment you stop growing. We've walked through the allure of the hero's journey, examined its shadow side of narcissism and division, explored Campbell's defense that the myth is actually about ego death rather than ego inflation, and reframed it for our time. Hero into pilgrim, villain into shadow, personal achievement into communal healing. But let's bring this home. What does all this mean for you right now in your actual life? First, I want you to pause and honestly examine. Where are you already living inside a hero story? We all have them, often without realizing it. I'm on a journey to transform my relationship with food, and my struggles are just trials I need to overcome. I'm building something meaningful with my career, and I just need to slay the dragons of doubt and resistance. I'm surviving in a difficult family system, and someday I'll emerge victorious and vindicated. I'm working on my personal development, and all these challenges are preparing me for my breakthrough. There's nothing inherently wrong with these narratives. They can provide fuel during difficult times. They help us make meaning from pain and chaos. But notice, are you centering yourself as the protagonist in a way that reduces other people to supporting characters in your movie? Are you casting these people around you as mentors, sidekicks, obstacles, or villains based on how they relate to your story? Because if you are, you're already caught in the protagonist delusion. And here's the subtle danger. You might also be unconsciously casting someone as the enemy you need to defeat. So take a deep breath and ask yourself, who have I made into the villain in my story? It might be obvious, a boss who doesn't appreciate you, or a family member who seems to sabotage your efforts, an ex-partner who represents everything you're trying to move beyond. It might be more abstract. Society, the system, people who don't understand, anyone who disagrees with my approach. Sometimes we even make ourselves the villain. My lack of willpower, my weak genetics, my traumatic childhood, that part of me that sabotages everything good. Now here's the crucial question. What would shift if instead of seeing them as the villain, I recognize them as reflecting something in my own psychological shadow? This isn't about excusing genuinely harmful behavior. If someone is abusive, they're responsible for their actions. But when you notice who you've turned into the dragon in your story, you can also explore what part of your own psyche they might be mirroring. Is your controlling boss reflecting your own issues with power and authority? Is your unsupportive family mirroring your own lack of self-compassion? Is your self-sabotage actually a protective mechanism that's trying to save you from vulnerability? The people and forces we cast as villains often carry the shadow material we haven't been willing to face in ourselves. Now, let's practice the reframe. Instead of being the hero of your story, what if you became a pilgrim on a sacred path? Look at whatever you're currently working on, your health, your relationships, your career, your personal growth. Instead of approaching it as a battle to win or a problem to solve, what if you approach it as a pilgrimage that's designed to change you? A pilgrim doesn't walk the Camino to prove anything or achieve anything specific. They walk to be transformed by the journey itself. They're open to whatever the path brings. Beauty and difficulty, clarity and confusion, companionship and solitude. So ask yourself, where in my life right now can I step off the hero stage and onto the pilgrim's path? Maybe it's in your relationships, where instead of casting yourself as the long-suffering protagonist, dealing with difficult people, you approach each interaction with genuine curiosity about what you can learn and how you can serve. Maybe it's in your work, where instead of seeing yourself as the underappreciated hero fighting against incompetent systems, you see yourself as someone learning to contribute your gifts in whatever context you find yourself. The pilgrim doesn't need applause or recognition. The pilgrim finds meaning in the walking itself. Here's another essential reflection. Who benefits from your growth besides you? This is where the hero's journey often collapses in our self-obsessed culture. We get so focused on before and after pictures, our breakthrough moments, our inspiring comeback stories, that we forget the mythic pattern is incomplete without the return. So think concretely about your own development. If you're healing a relationship with food in your body, who else feels the ripple effects? Maybe your children who learn healthier patterns from watching you. Maybe your partner who experiences less tension around meals and body image in your household. Maybe friends who find permission to be gentler with themselves because of your example. If you're learning to manage anxiety and regulate your nervous system, who else benefits? Maybe your coworkers who feel safer and calmer in your presence. Maybe people in your community who experience you as more grounded and available for genuine connection. If you're doing recovery work from addiction or trauma or unhealthy patterns, who receives the medicine you're developing? Maybe someone who hasn't found hope yet. Who will see possibility in your journey? Maybe family members who get to experience the person you become when you're not running from your pain. Your growth isn't just about you. The real question is, what treasure are you bringing back to your community? So here's a journaling practice that can help you see these patterns more clearly. I want you to create 3 columns on a page. Column 1, my hero story. Write out the current narrative you're living. What's your call to adventure? What trials are you facing? Who or what is your dragon? What transformation are you seeking? Be honest about how you see yourself as the protagonist of this story. Now, in column 2, I want you to write your shadow story, right? Write the same narrative from the shadow perspective. Where might you be inflating your ego or importance? Who are you casting as villains or obstacles? How might you be using your heroic journey to justify behavior that actually isn't serving your growth or hurting others? What are you avoiding looking at in yourself? And then column 3, your Pilgrim story. Reframe the entire narrative. If you weren't the hero but a humble pilgrim, how would your approach to your challenges differently? What would it look like to embrace not knowing, to be genuinely curious about who wants to emerge? How could you face your difficulties as invitations for growth rather than enemies to defeat? And who would ultimately benefit from whatever wisdom you gain on the path? That exercise can reveal where you're caught in protagonist thinking, where you're projecting villains instead of doing shadow work, and how you might shift toward a more grounded, service-oriented approach to your development. So let me share a story that illustrates these principles in action. I worked with a client, let's call her Jane, who came to me completely absorbed in the hero narrative around her weight loss journey, right? Every meal was a battle, every craving was a dragon to slay, every slip-up was a defeat in the war against her body. At first, this framing gave her incredible energy and motivation. She felt like she was finally taking control, finally fighting back against the years of struggle. She was the hero of her transformation story. But over time, this approach crushed her spirit. The more she saw herself as the warrior in an epic battle, the more she saw her body as the enemy. Food became the villain, hunger became weakness, any sign that she was human, tired, stressed, craving comfort, became evidence that she was failing her heroic mission. Her family got cast as supporting characters in a drama. Her husband became either the supportive ally who enabled her heroic choices, or the obstacle who tempted her with unhealthy options. Her children became the audience she was performing transformation for rather than full human she was in a relationship with. When we started working together, I gently invited her to consider a different approach. Instead of approaching her health as a war to win, what if she approached it as a pilgrimage, a sacred journey of learning to care for herself with compassion? Instead of seeing her body as the enemy to defeat, what if she saw it as her traveling companion on the path, something to listen to, understand, and work with rather than against? Instead of casting food as the villain, what if she approached her eating as a practice of nourishment, pleasure, and presence? The shift was profound. Suddenly, it wasn't about conquest anymore. It was about relationship. It was not about winning. It was about learning. It was not about perfection, but about practicing kindness toward herself. And here's the beautiful part. As she healed her own relationship with food and her body, the effects rippled throughout her family. Her husband learned to eat with less shame and anxiety. Her children felt less pressure around her. Their home became a peaceful place around meals and body image. The difference between hero and pilgrim consciousness: the hero seeks personal glory and validation. The pilgrim seeks transformation that naturally blesses everyone around them. So here's my invitation to you as we close. Take some time this week, maybe tonight, maybe over the weekend, and genuinely reflect on these questions. Where am I living as the hero of my own story in ways that might be limiting my growth or hurting my relationships? Who have I cast as villains? And what might they be reflecting about my own psychological shadow? What would change if I approached my current challenge as a pilgrim rather than a warrior? And who will ultimately benefit when I bring back whatever gifts this journey offers me? Because here's what I've learned both personally and through working with hundreds of clients. The most profound transformations don't come from heroic effort or willpower or conquering your limitations. They come from the humility to be changed by life itself, from the courage to face what you've been avoiding in yourself, from the wisdom to connect your healing to something larger than your own individual improvement. That's not less heroic than the mythic version. In our narcissistic, performance-obsessed culture, it might be the most heroic path available to us. And this is what I mean when I talk about awakened genius. It's not about becoming special or enlightened or superior to anyone else. It's about waking up to your ordinary human capacity for growth, service, and connection. It's about being brave enough to face your shadows instead of projecting them onto others. Humble enough to let life teach you instead of trying to control everything. generous enough to share whatever wisdom you gain along the way. The awakening isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a quality of consciousness you practice moment by moment. It's choosing curiosity over certainty, integration over conquest, service over self-aggrandizement. And maybe, if we're willing to walk this path together as fellow pilgrims rather than competing heroes, we can help heal some of the division and narcissism that's tearing our world apart. Maybe that's the real hero's journey for our time. Learning to be fully human in service of the larger human community. The awakening isn't a single moment, it's a lifelong practice. Awaken yourself, awaken your genius. And hell, awaken your power to serve something larger than your individual story. Walk your path with intention and stay curious about your shadows. And remember that the most heroic thing you can do is often the most humble. Showing up with presence, offering your gifts without attachment to recognition, and treating every person you encounter as the protagonist of their own sacred journey. Thank you for walking this path with me today. Thank you for listening to Food on the Mind Awaken Genius. Until next time, keep questioning the stories that limit you. Keep growing in service of others, and keep walking the pilgrim's path with an open heart. I'll meet you along the way.